Then this section will introduce the comparison of the processing flow of V1 and V2 API. After comparison, then it may be a more intuitive distinction. What about the same, or with take Spark as an example? So for the V1 version, first of all, we will access the external data source through the source plugin as the dataset in the Spark API. Then through the transformation plugin to Spark dataset data conversion processing. Finally, in the written part, the processor transforms Spark dataset to write out the data source to the target. You can see that the entire V1 version of a whole process is based on the Spark dataset API. That is to say, connector and computing engine are heavily coupled. For a process in the V2 version, first, the plugin needs to access the external data source as the data source of SeaTunnel's own data structure. Then if you want to process this access data source, first of all, to go through the translation layer in the SeaTunnel engine, first put this actually, my own data. The data source of that data structure translates to Spark data source. It can only pass at this time be using this transform plugin, then do some conversion processing on Spark's data source. That's the same if we want to put this data, right out to external storage, right? The first thing to do is to use the translation ability of SeaTunnel engine translate Spark data source into data source for SeaTunnel's own data structure. It is called SeaTunnel row data source. And then finally through the plugin write the data source out to the target data source. This is a whole process. That is generally at the API layer and the computing engine layer. The V2 release decouples the connector API from the engine. The implementation of the connector no longer depends on the engine, make extensions and implementations more flexible. So from the perspective of the future planning of the community, the back is mainly going to take this V2 version of API and then more functions and features will be supported in V2 and then V1. After stabilizing, this means no longer maintaining it. So it is suggested that this developer and user should focus on this new version, which is on the V2 API.